Welcome to the Menopause and Cancer podcast, where we speak with cancer patients, survivors, and brilliant experts in their fields to help us find solutions to our symptoms and ideas to improve our health. My name is Danny Binnington, and I am delighted to talk to you about how you can step into the driver's seat and put cancer into the backseat, your boot, or even strap it onto the roof. I'm delighted to speak to Ria. Ria is a young cancer survivor. She's also here as an expert, and she wants to share with us from her personal experience how she navigated a lesser known cancer, uterine womb cancer, as a woman in her early 30s. But she's also here to share with us her professional experience and what she has learned as a leadership and health coach, as a meditation, mindfulness, and yoga teacher. This is a compelling conversation. And if you want to know how you can start to take control, then you must listen to this conversation. I really hope this chat is going to impact you as much as it did me. I'm feeling not just refreshed and eager to go and explore and be curious, but I'm also sitting a little bit in the comfort that it's okay to not rear and go and do everything at once, but to also just take a pause and a moment and really ask, what do I need? Ria, it's lovely to sit here with you today. We're both in denim shirts. We're aligned, aren't we?
I got the memo.
It's so great. Ria, we only met recently. We were both invited to a dinner party of a very special doctor, and I had the honor of sitting next to you, and I just felt I wanted to talk more and more and more to you, and here we are.
Yeah, thank you, Danny. Likewise, it was such a magical evening, and just all those women around the table, and men. But yeah, it was a beautiful night.
Yeah, absolutely. Ria, you are a meditation and mindfulness coach. You're also a leadership coach and a health coach. And you applied most in the last few years, much of your knowledge and expertise also into your private life.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your work with Headspace. So it's a big app. I really love Headspace. I think everyone should tune into and listen to their apps. What did you do, and what was your work for Headspace?
Yeah, Headspace has a very special place in my heart because it was actually one of the first apps I ever used back in 2014 when I was originally diagnosed with cancer. And then lo and behold, I ended up working for the organisation in 2019. And my role there was very much working with businesses that were really curious about meditation, mindfulness, training the mind, and bringing it in almost as a benefit for their teams to help with stress, to improve focus, lots of different things that, this ancient tradition can absolutely support. And it was special times there, creating programs for businesses, and at times being able to lead meditations in, big corporate organizations. And the pandemic was a real time to dig deep and do as much as we could, because everything was obviously virtual and there was a huge demand for what we were offering.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anyone doesn't know, Headspace is a great app. It has so many meditations, and there is so much scientific knowledge and understanding of how beneficial meditation can be, even if it's 10 minutes a day. What was that type of cancer you were diagnosed with before you started to work for Headspace?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed with uterine cancer, which is womb cancer. And it's interesting because I'd never heard of that before. Obviously, I'd heard of a womb. My daughter at the time was 2 years old. So, I'd gone through pregnancy and everything. Uterine cancer was not something that I'd come across that term before. And even to this day, actually, I'll be asked my history multiple times when I'm going through treatment and checkups and everything. And you'll have to give your kind of whole medical history. And even now I'll say it. And sometimes you'll have clinicians say, sorry, what's that? Ovarian? No, uterine, womb cancer. And they're like, oh, right, okay.
So much lesser known a cancer, much lesser spoken about than breast cancer, much lesser spoken about than other types of cancer. How did you find out you had uterine cancer?
Yeah, and just on that, actually, where you said about less known, my mother had died from breast cancer, so it's always been in my life. You know, she had breast cancer. My grandmother had breast cancer 3 times and actually lived into her 90s. So I was always kind of surrounded by individuals journeying with cancer. And I was therefore very in tune with my body. And particularly when I lost my mum, I changed everything in my life because I didn't want to I'd seen some of the science around epigenetics and stuff, and I was wanting to do everything I could. So I was very in tune. And at the time I was doing a lot of running. And all of a sudden my runs changed. It felt like I was dragging bricks. I started to feel really tired for no reason. And my husband and I were trying for another baby, and I started to get bleeding after sex. So kind of putting all of those combinations together, it just didn't feel right. And I remember going to the doctor, to the GP, and was told that, look, you're a young mother, you're back at work now, there's a lot going on in your life, try and find some time to de-stress. And so I was like, okay, went away and just wasn't happy. And my husband and I were in Spain on holiday, and I just literally just come out of my mouth. I just said to him, I think I've got like cervical cancer or something. There's something just not right. And he was like, that I don't think you have, but get it checked. So I ended up having biopsies and that whole journey, and was put on medication. And anyway, long story short, when they looked at the biopsy results, there was precancerous cells. They went back in again about a month later, and then they found some cancerous cells in my womb. Yeah, so it's early stage.
Hey, thanks for watching this episode. 73% of people who watch my podcast haven't yet clicked the subscribe button, and 11% haven't hit the button to turn on notifications. I want these conversations to reach as many women as possible who might need to hear them. So if you've ever enjoyed listening to this podcast, please hit subscribe now. And I wonder how many people are listening to this who are also living with the experience of other people in their lives journeying with cancer. And I think journeying with cancer is a really good description, because me too, in a similar situation, we had so much cancer on my dad's side of the family. No woman, and they were all females, have survived. And so I grew up with, and as a young adult, as a young woman, as a person who was lucky enough to become a mum, all the women on my dad's side of the family didn't make it, and cancer shortened their life. And so I also know what it feels like to be living around people who are journeying with cancer. It has an impact on you. And I always say cancer is a family affair, right? Because it can impact someone who loves a person with cancer as much as the person affected by cancer. And I know that because I've been on both sides. And I can honestly say that I felt really strong feelings and difficult feelings being with my aunties, for example, when we lost them and when they were having difficult times. So thank you for bringing that up. It's really important to acknowledge that we don't just carry and live our own journey. We live the journeys of the people around us as well, don't we?
Yeah, it's so layered as an experience for everybody.
Yeah. So you were a young mum to a 2-year-old. You were diagnosed with early stage womb cancer. What's the treatment for womb cancer? Let's talk about it, because it's lesser known, as you say.
It is. Yeah. Oh my God. It was 2 weeks of absolute hell. That's what it felt like as me. And so many decisions were made in that short period of time, from diagnosis to I had surgery. That all happened in a space of 14 days. And I still can't even wrap my head around it, that I made all those decisions. So kind of going from having all the scans you can possibly have, MRI, PET scan, CT scan, blood tests, etc., to then getting the date in my diary for the surgery, which was, lengthy conversations around this. So hysterectomy. And at the time I was having a conversation with my consultant on what we do with my ovaries. And we were looking at, do we go down the route of saving some of my eggs? Do I keep my ovaries? And there I am looking at this little 2-year-old thinking, whatever decision I make, it's so difficult because I can make the decision of removing my ovaries, which could lessen my risk of a reoccurrence. And by taking that away, that also takes the opportunity for her to have any siblings. And if I kept them, there could be the risk of reoccurrence and maybe siblings. So it was just the most gut-wrenching decision to make. And I opted for total hysterectomy with my ovaries removed. And that was done laparoscopically. So I remember when my mum had a hysterectomy, and it was like, you know, back in those days, like she'd be just cut open and sent on her way. The mindset around it hasn't really changed that much, to be honest, as someone that had this done in 2014. So I had it laparoscopically removed, and then within 24 hours I was back home on the sofa recovering, and just given some pain meds. I wasn't told about surgical menopause.
Wow. Crazy. Talk about medical gaslighting.
Yeah.
I mean, we're going to get into all of the strategies that you've put together in supporting yourself over all of those years, because I want everyone at home listening to our conversation to learn from what you've done and a little bit about your journey. But let's talk about that moment. It's a decision you made in time, and often we look back and we think, gosh, if I just allowed myself more time, or if there had been more time, with hindsight, would I have decided differently, or would it have just been a better process if someone maybe has given me a bit of support? There is all of that, isn't it? Maybe your decision would have been the same.
Yeah.
But there is all of that as well. So surgical menopause, no one talked to you about what that would be like if they let you go without your ovaries? No. Wow. So you didn't also know, right? You also didn't know, I guess, what that would be like, because I remember going through chemotherapy and my period stopping. I didn't really know that that was to do with my ovaries. I was so poorly educated on women's health in general that I just didn't clock it. I just thought side effect of chemo. And so you must have had symptoms. Like, don't know anyone who wakes up from surgical menopause. So what was it like?
And also, like, I didn't have my mum around to ask her anything about any of this. And I just remember sitting on the chair in our lounge, and it must have been a couple of days after, and feeling like I had ants crawling all over my body. I was just like, what is this? And in the middle of the night, I would wake up absolutely drenched in sweat. Like, drenched is not even the right word, like absolutely, like I've been in a swimming pool. And I would just have it just all sat on my skin, and like get up and kind of sort myself out and then go back to bed again. And I was like, why is this happening? Oh, it must be something to do with the surgery, or it must be because I'm just so stressed. And then I met up with a friend who was a lot older than me, and she said, this is menopause, Ria. This is menopause. And then that was the penny drop moment for me, like, wow, okay. And then that took me down my own path to start exploring what that meant for me, of a woman that was 34 at the time. And everything out there was so geared towards people like in their, I don't know, 60, 65. I mean, I don't want to use the term normal, because everybody's bodies are different, but the kind of general information and booklets were all very much geared towards elder women than me. So it was an absolute minefield.
Yeah. And that is actually before the menopause conversation, particularly in the UK, has started to boom, because over the last few years, 4 or 5 years, we had a lot of talk about the menopause.
Yeah.
And that doesn't always get extended to subgroups like us. And every one of you at home listening, you are part of our little subgroup bubble. But at least there is more awareness, and GPs are a little bit more clued up about talking about it. And even doctors and surgeons and oncologists are starting to change their language and maybe how they're speaking, because we all know it's a big deal. Back in 2014, there was no such a thing.
No. And it was almost like such a taboo. to talk about it. Like, and I almost want to throw in that there was an element of shame attached to it. Because, and this is how I really felt at the time, like there's this, me 34-year-old woman with this tiny little toddler and questions constantly coming at me. When are you going to have another child? Just people not being malicious or anything, just not knowing, or almost suppressing how I was feeling or what I was doing because it was too uncomfortable to talk about, or it was just an uncomfortable topic. And I just, back in 2014, there literally was nothing. And I remember reaching out to the Macmillan team at our local hospital, and they were like, well, you could join this group, but the average age of the ladies there are 67 years old, and I don't think it would be really appropriate for you. That it's going to give you a huge amount of support in that area. So it was like...
You know what, Ria, listening to you, I know these stories still exist today. Like we have women after women emailing us, reaching out, that still say, I've been pushed into surgical menopause after cancer and I have not had help. And people still saying, oh my God, doctors are just prescribing tamoxifen, for example, as a little white tablet. I've never even seen an oncologist. We still know it's not, we don't get the preparation, but it's better. One thing that I feel really sad about is that I haven't started my work 10 years ago. When I'm 2024, and I know we're doing a great job, we're supporting lots of people, but it's 10 years ago, 20 years ago, we needed more support and women have been let down over and over again. Where did your inquiries lead you? What happened? How did you put your research together?
Yeah, wow. Do you know, this is where the meditation practice that I was doing was really getting me more in tune with my body. I was more mindful of my body. And because I was becoming more aware through a very daily practice, I started to notice certain foods, certain drinks were not good for my symptoms in regards to menopause. So I had started drinking coffee when I had my daughter. Ding, it helps you kind of get through the day with a very young baby and nightly feeds, which I'm sure many people may be able to relate to. And so I loved coffee, but I realised coffee was not good for me. It brought on more hot flushes. It really impacted the anxiety that I was experiencing, because that was one of the actual main symptoms I started to notice. Certain foods were just like nut and alcohol. Not that I drank much alcohol, but if I did, I paid the consequences that night. So my meditation practice actually revealed a lot of awareness in my body in relation to the food and drink that I was putting in. And then alongside that, I started gathering resources. Marilyn Glenville, I think that's her name, was an incredible woman that's wrote so many books on menopause. I started reading her. She had a very balanced approach in terms of Western approach, but also kind of alternative complementary. And through that, I started then to experiment in the space of acupuncture, for example, which just was incredible. Looking at vitamins and minerals and just really opening up a world that I hadn't explored that much up until that point.
Yeah. Because sometimes when people talk about the menopause in general, they talk about it as your second spring. And it is called the second spring in cultures like Japan, for example. And it's a beautiful word. And I kind of get how, I do love it as well. And I kind of get how we can't just talk about symptoms and how they're debilitating and stopping us in our tracks. There is more to it, right?
Yeah.
However, when it happens to you at the age of 34, because of a treatment that is there to help you survive, it is anything but a second blimming spring. It is a shock, right? It's a shock to your body. It floors you.
It happens immediately. Yeah. There's no gradual easing into the menopause. It is like one day you've got all the hormones in the world. The next day, gone.
Yeah. And yet it's so important to tap into some of the ancient wisdom from other cultures to help us put together a toolkit. And that is really, really quite crucial. So I've just recently released a Menopause After Cancer crash course on YouTube and the podcast. And I think it's episode 5 or 6. I talk about all of our non-hormonal complementary options like acupuncture. We have plenty of data that acupuncture and meditation is really helpful, and it can totally combine medication, and it can be on there on the same level as medication in terms of how helpful it is. And it's important to not discount all of that. Okay, so meditation, minerals and vitamins, looking at your diet, avoiding triggers is something I always talk about, because it doesn't cost you anything. It's great when it works. It works immediately, but you just have to be a bit attuned, isn't it? Acupuncture, you started to do that. What else did you do?
I changed my relationship with exercise. So up until that point of my diagnosis, and even shortly afterwards, a lot of my exercise had been high intensity. I'm a personal trainer. So I was, very aware of my body. I was running, I was doing all of those things. And my energy was different after a hysterectomy and going into menopause. And I started, through the books I was reading and the acupuncture, I was thinking all of my exercise is very yang. It's very intense. It's kind of like, the burning heat of the sun. But where's the moon? There is no moon exercise in my life at the moment. And that was a real pivot for me. And that took me into yoga, which complemented my meditation practice. And I started practicing yoga, and I noticed a real shift in every different aspect of my life, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. There was just this shift because I was moving my body and working with my body in ways that I don't think I ever had. Yeah.
So what are people's moon practices? I really like that. And there is a lot of emphasis at the moment on strength training and lifting weights, which is great. And I wonder if that can also be someone's moon practice. So your moon practice became your yoga, and you know how passionate I am about yoga, and I was and I'm going to share that, not because I want to show off, but I was getting changed the other day, and I was in my sports bra knickers, and I was like holding my arms up like a bodybuilder. For anyone listening at home, you just have to imagine. And I was looking at my triceps, and I was like in the mirror saying to my husband, look how strong I've become. And he just looked at my back and actually said, whoa, have you looked at your back? And I turned around, and I've got a really strong back now. And I thought, what am I doing? I'm doing my yoga, I'm consistent, and I've added one class a week where just for half an hour, I use small weights. They're not even big. They're a kilo. And I don't push myself too hard. It feels manageable. I stretch a lot. We still breathe a lot. And I guess this is my moon practice. We don't have to push ourselves to the max to be effective, do we? No, it's a weird thinking that.
Yeah, like the whole, training, like running and HIIT training and like real heavy strength training where it can really overload our parasympathetic nervous system, our sympathetic nervous system. Those are what I would kind of call like your yang-based exercises. It calls for a lot of energy and intensity in the body. And of course, they're all the craze. And sometimes for all the wrong reasons, but we won't go into that. Kind of what I think of in yin practices are things like swimming and walking and gardening, and even things like housework, yoga, Pilates, things that we are moving, but we're almost replenishing our energy in a different way in those exercises. And I just realized when I was like looking at the scale, I was all like up here with so much HIIT and intense activity. And some of that was almost a way of punishing my body for a cancer diagnosis. And there was no kind of nourishment or looking after my body with yin type practices.
Yeah. We often feel we have to be so strong, don't we, after cancer, and getting back to strength and proving to ourselves that we've got it and that we're strong becomes part of that, maybe regaining some confidence, but it does leave us with our energy spent. Now, I don't feel we can talk about managing surgically onset menopause in a young woman without ever talking about hormone replacement therapy. I think it always needs to be a conversation. We need to know when is it appropriate. We also need to know the benefits of hormone replacement therapy and the risks to the individual, because you have bones, you have a heart, you have a brain, and you're young, and that also needs helping and supporting. When you started hormone replacement therapy, how did that come about? So you had all of these other things in your toolbox,
Yeah.
and you started on HRT. So how did that happen?
Yeah, so at that point, I'd been going on my own for 6 years. I had had, my kind of sign off, 5-year remission check sign off. And the effects of menopause were lessening. It wasn't, the intensity of hot flushes and stuff wasn't happening so much. It was started to be a lot less. However, my mental health was not great. And I had come across some books in a podcast on anxiety and panic attacks and how it was linked to people that had gone through the menopause and how HRT could really help. And it almost felt like it was the final mountain for me to overcome was my mental health, because mainly of the panic attacks I was having. So I started to explore HRT. So 6 years down the line, spoke to some incredible people in that world. And we're now in 2020, February. I go along for an appointment. I get prescribed HRT. And I think to myself, okay, this is it. Like, I need to look after my brain. I need to reduce the impact of osteoporosis, all the things that you get told, dementia, etc., etc. And I start taking HRT, pessary inserting it into the vagina, and patches that I wore on my leg, on my thigh. And within 2 months, every time I went to put the pessary in, I felt like something was pushing it back out again. And I started to get bleeding. And reaching out to this doctor during the pandemic at this stage, I said, look, I'm bleeding. And she's like, oh, it's just because of vaginal narrowing of your vagina, and it's very thin. Keep going. We need to get the levels up, blah, blah, blah. And then I wasn't happy. And then in July of 2020, I had an examination with a gynecologist that I knew. And she said, I think this is cancer in your vagina. And that's when I had the news of a reoccurrence. So HRT was thrown in the bin, literally ripped off my legs in her room. And that was my very short journey with HRT.
So Ria, the cancer in your vagina, was that part of the original womb uterine cancer?
No.
It was a new cancer.
It was a new cancer. But it's always so complex in this world of cancer, isn't it? Because there's two ways that I look at this. Either when I had surgery, there was some, and I've chatted to my oncologist about this, either when I had surgery in 2014, there were some cells that loitered around the vagina and just stayed dormant. And the minute I put a pessary in, they thought, party time, estrogen, woohoo, and started to grow. Or that wasn't the case, and by putting HRT into my body, it created the environment for, someone that had a history, and also with my family lineage as well, my maternal line. It was like, yep, and it created. So
I love that you are here. It means so much to me and my whole team behind this show. We release this show for free to help people like you learn more about this often misunderstood topic. And because so many of us feel totally under-supported going through all of this. In return, all I ask is that you help me on my mission by hitting the subscribe button and clicking the button to turn on notifications. It really helps a lot. Thank you. And now on with the show. Yeah. And we are going to get a really brilliant expert on the podcast in a few weeks' time who will just talk about gynecological cancers and the use of hormone replacement therapy, whether that is systemic or whether that is localized, to really educate, because I know so many people reach out to us and say, look, there is even less data on the safety or the problems of HRT after gynecological cancers than there is after breast cancer, for example. And we know it's shockingly poor after breast cancer. And everyone is really upset that we don't actually have more data. So when you were first put on HRT, was there a contraindication to the particular type of womb cancer you've had to HRT, or do women usually get prescribed HRT after your type of womb cancer? Do you know?
Do you know, it's such a interesting and complex area, because after I'd had surgery in 2014, I remember my consultant reaching out to a professor at Royal Marsden, and he was just of the opinion of, she's very young, not to go on to HRT for the first year, and then to work with a consultant on checks and balances, and to make a decision at some point in the future if it was right for patient and quality of life, blah, blah, blah. Sadly, my consultant retired. So then I'm kind of with a new consultant that doesn't really have much of my history. And as you said, like, the evidence there is just so minimal. So when I'd gone to this particular doctor in this clinic, in hindsight now, and now because I've got so much more knowledge, the questions, there weren't the questions that should have been asked, were not asked. The internal examinations and recommending, you know, all of those things were not done. And there was an element of it almost being seen as a magic bullet and the answer to everything, than looking at the bigger picture. And I can only say that now because of where I am in my journey, but I have compassion for that person, that past self in 2020 that was desperate, that was, you know, having panic attacks and suicidal ideation. And I did see HRT, 6 years remission, as the answer.
Yeah. And for a lot of people, it is.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, it is, because living without the hormones in a body like that is a really big ask. And unless we're really supported in those times with regular doctors' visits who can really help us find an integrative approach and maybe some medication and alternative therapies, and we cannot know when we're left on our own, right? You're a very clever, very resourceful young person. The majority of the people I speak to aren't like you. They do not know how to advocate for themselves and go and find out all of the data. And the lack of data there is affects all of us. It affects doctors, clinicians, researchers, patients, family members, because what do you do? And so I don't, Tell me what happened when you were diagnosed the second time round. What was the treatment then?
Oh, God.
Oh, gosh. Okay. I want to hear it, though. Let's hear it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. And it honours that kind of journey, really. So summer of 2020, back into scans, back into PETs and MRIs and all sorts. And then in the November, I started chemotherapy, which I'd never had prior. I'd seen my mum go through chemotherapy a couple of times when she had a couple of treatments. But my experience of chemo as a daughter looking at a mother who then died put a huge amount of fear into me and my body. And I nearly didn't have it. And I really used my integrative practices and meditation to really just ask permission of my body that this is what's going to happen. And I decided that if I was going to do chemotherapy, that I had to reframe it. I had to be a foot in reality of, this is a chemotherapy drug that's going into my body. So I had paclitaxel and carboplatin. And to keep me grounded and to give me some sense of hope, I also treated it as almost like an initiation ceremony. And I started to form a relationship with the drugs. I was like, I need to not fight this drug or have resistance to this drug. I need to find a way of making friends with it. So I was having Taxol every week, and I was having carboplatin every 3. And I used to call, I think Taxol was because it is derived from a tree. So from a yew tree, so paclitaxel. So I was like, formed this relationship with yew trees, and with carboplatin, I called it the golden liquid. And I was having the treatment at home at home because I'd had private healthcare, a huge privilege, I know. And I just had the medicine room, and I said, "That's Mummy's medicine room. That's where I have my treatment Imogen." So she was homeschooling because of COVID, and and I had treatment for just under 6 months through the
And
pandemic.
the really interesting thing here is that I know we have a lot of people sitting at home also very resistant to taking their medication or to complying to stay on medication. So we know out of everyone listening, about 70% are probably breast cancer patients just by the natural division of cancers. We know so many, about 70% of those are put on long-term endocrine treatment. And we know from data and statistics, but also from the people that share in our community, that so many people sit on those drugs and can't get themselves to take it. The amount of people that say, I've been prescribed tamoxifen, for example, and I just worry so much of what it's going to do to me. I haven't started. I was meant to start. People delaying because they haven't had doctor's appointments. It's so normal. But you were able to, you reframed it. That is quite exceptional, I think. Yeah.
And it was essential.
So you completed that. It was essential.
It was essential for me. It got me through. Yeah.
But you didn't stop your inquiry into what else you can do, because when I sat next to you at dinner, we were talking about all sorts of things. We were talking about really deep breathwork practices. There was another person there who was incredible. She talked about psychedelic therapy for anxiety. We talked about so many things that are off the scale a little bit, aren't they? They are not even legal in this country.
Yeah.
But what is it that you did? So breath work was a big part. What else?
Breath work. I was really fortunate to work with an incredible medicine woman from Ecuador. And I also was working really closely with my meditation teacher, who trained in the Tibetan Buddhist Tibetan lineage. So with them, I started to, my mindset towards the treatment was about love. What would love do? How can I bring compassion to myself? How can I bring compassion to this situation that our family are traveling through at the moment? So that informed everything. So I just went on this journey of absolute inner discovery. And in some ways, the pandemic allowed for me to do that deep inner work. So the breath work, I'd gone on some sort of retreats and workshops prior to the pandemic and continued that online. At the end of my chemotherapy, I decided as well to explore psychedelics. And that, quite frankly, was one of the most sort of magical experiences I've ever had in my life. I felt so much more connected to nature. I mean, I was doing a lot of walks in the fields, but this was just a whole nother level of connection. And just continued. You kind of think that you've got to a phase where you know enough, and then like this other layer opens up, and then of course, like you just keep on going. And again, through that, it was going deeper into meditation. Meditation is often seen as like this one thing that you do via an app, but there are so many different approaches and teachings and techniques. So I deepened my practice there, and I started doing a lot of work with IFS, internal family systems, where you very much are forming this relationship with all the parts within you, the voices, the inner critic it may be, or like this voice that shows up to protect you but can be a pain in the arse at times. So I started to do a lot of that with an incredible therapist, and I started to train in as a systemic constellations practitioner. And all of that, going into that field, just helped to change everything for me personally.
Wow. And so healing is so multifaceted and it means so many different things to some people, right? And some
Yeah.
people just want to look at research paper and talk about every single percentage of benefit and risk and calculation and drugs and compounds and ingredients. And it's very technical. And for some people, and what I'm hearing from you, your healing took you off to worlds that were unexplored by you before, right? They had nothing to do with how you eat and maybe how you move or what type of exercise or whether you add another vitamin. Your healing became something bigger in a way, right?
Yeah. Deeply spiritual, and finding that sense of agency, because when anybody gets a cancer diagnosis, straight away you're labelled a patient. Straight away, the sense of agency, confidence, empowerment can be taken away from you, just the nature of being in that system. And you can almost feel like a victim to your diagnosis. And I certainly spent many, many years in that space. So I think ultimately what I was doing and have been doing since 2020 is reclaiming all the pieces of me that I'd scattered and thrown and suppressed and forgot about, reclaiming all those parts of me and having this sense of agency again and empowerment that I had at times outsourced to other people. And that's not to say that going to other people is the wrong thing to do. Absolutely not. It's the intention behind it. So, for example, am I going to put my head in the sand and completely understand when people do that? And I have done that myself, and almost get someone to make all my decisions for me. Totally get it. For me and the experience that I've gone through, I had to reclaim and be the one that sat in the driver's seat on this journey and not to be the passenger anymore, because I was sick of being the passenger.
Yeah. And for anyone listening at home who also feels, gosh, cancer happened to me, because of course it does. No one wants it. No one invites it. And then treatment happened to us, because initially that's really what happens for most people. We embark on cancer treatment and everything is quite quick. And even if you have 2 months from diagnosis to start of treatment, it's quick. Like in the grand scheme of a life, it's quick, and we all process things differently. So things happen to us initially. If someone is a few months on or a few years on and still feels like it's all kind of happening to them, how do you think, as a health coach, as a leadership coach, what could a step be for someone to step into the driver's seat? What could some actionable points be?
Yeah, that's such a great question, Danny. Do you know, the first thing is that, as you were saying that, and I can relate this to my own journey, is it's happening. It's constant, isn't it? It's go, 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 go. You're always on the go. Stop. Just stop. Just pause. Gather people around you that you absolutely trust with every single fibre of your body. And that gathering doesn't need to necessarily be a physical gathering, but just know who is on your team and keep it small to begin with. And just pause and stop and think about the answer to this question, which is, what do I need right now? And listen. And keep asking that question and keep listening for that answer until there's something deep within you that just knows. Because it is there. And when you get that then enables you to start moving into the driver's seat and kicking cancer to the back seat or to the boot of the car. Or if you want, stick it on the roof.
I love that. On the roof rack. Love that. Love it. It is so good to hear your words, because when I speak to people, for example, that are interested in joining our Empowered Menopause program, the answers they want, the questions they want answers for when they first come are always very much ahead into the future. Danny, what should I do if X, Y, and Z happens and I need to figure out, and can you help us very far in the future? But when I then assemble a group of 10 women, for example, and we embark on, say, 4 months of working together and having regular Zoom calls, by the end of our time together, the questions they first came into the group with are no longer existent in 8 out of 10 people, because something has changed that we didn't even know. And so whatever the big question was, often is irrelevant. So we can only ask, what do I need now? Because of course the mind wants totality. The mind wants answers. My mind only wanted to get me to, in 5 years' time, I can then do this. My husband kept saying, but we've got to go on holiday until then. You can't wait for 5 years to ever book a holiday again because you're so scared. And I was like, so glad he booked the holidays for us, because I would have been unable, constantly thinking, what if something goes wrong whilst we're away, for example. But in the moment, I also knew, what did I need? And that was making memories with my family. And as you were explaining, the person I trusted the most was my husband, is my husband, going through, and I allowed him to take over and make some decisions. So whatever you just said resonates so deeply with me from a professional level, of having coached so many people, but also from a personal level. And I think sometimes it's good to disconnect, to stop, isn't it? Disconnect from social media, because it's trying to give you answers. Find answers to your solution. Disconnect from all of the noises and sounds and opinions, and just ask, what do I need just today? Maybe just today.
Now there's so much wisdom in our bodies, there really is. And just that opportunity to start to realize that you have all the answers right now to all the questions that you have. And as you said, the mind, absolutely, it is so good, and it has been so conditioned in our lifetimes to ping pong between past and future, keep going back and forth, back and forth. And the more we learn to train it to be here right now, that's where we can start to explore what we need, or how we feel about a particular moment.
Yeah. So after all these things you have explored, what's next for you? Is there something you're still curious about from this big wild world of, how do we call it, alternative therapies or complementary therapies? Like, what's next?
Honestly, I am such a seeker and such a curious individual by my very nature. I love exploring and pushing boundaries and being perhaps a pain in the arse sometimes. So what's next for me? I want to continue exploring the realms of psychedelic medicine. The studies that University College of London are doing, what's happening in Australia, who have legalized it now for patients with mental health conditions, in America as well, in various states. So definitely that space. And also I'm really fascinated in how AI is going to start to change the landscape of cancer, be it the cancer research. Like, we know that AI can just do so much more than one human being. So the partnership between a human and an AI that can get through thousands of data points, I think will be really fascinating to see what happens in that space, and how it potentially can come up with more tailored personal treatments for people. So I'm keeping a watch on the world of AI and how it integrates into healthcare ethically.
That is fascinating. Wow. Will you come back and report back on your personal journey of inquiry, which I think is fascinating, but also on what happens with the AI side of things? Because I'm sure there are a lot of people at home now thinking, oh my gosh, yeah, what AI has such a big impact. How will it impact all of us? Hopefully for the better. Gosh, Ria, I know that there is a lot more to your story, so many more things to unpick. Time maybe for another conversation. I think this has been such a great starting point for many people who want to get into the driver's seat. Thank you for sharing your personal story, but also really allowing us to tap into your coach brain, your practical, brain as a coach. It's really quite amazing. I can't wait to hopefully sit next to you over a big bowl of food again, like we did the other day, because that was fabulous.
It really was. We should do that, Danny. Thank you for having me. It's been wonderful to talk and share and just contribute to much needed resources in this space. And what you're doing with this podcast is just absolutely amazing. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Well, it wouldn't happen without all of you amazing survivors, but also experts that are here to share their time freely with us. And really, everyone always really wants to do really well. Every expert, every survivor, everyone really takes their job at sharing their stories, their expertise, with a lot of care and integrity. And I think that's what's so lovely. No one is here to sell anyone anything or to try and make anything better for themselves. Everyone's really there for a really honorable reason. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Danny.
Gosh, isn't Ria amazing? I'm so grateful that we were all able to listen to her. Did you know there are over 20,000 of us that listen to our conversations every single month? And I don't take my work lightly. I'm really feeling all of you out there. And I know you've all had a really tough time. Otherwise, you wouldn't have to be here and listen to our conversations. And I want to acknowledge that. Really, I should acknowledge it every single week I show up here, because I truly try and zone in to each one of your experiences. I also know that we're also vastly different, and we've all got so many different life experiences, different backgrounds that are going to shape us and also change and shape our decision-making process. And so our opinions will differ. But that to me has never mattered. You might have a really different take on something and I might have a totally different opinion. It really doesn't matter. We have so much shared experience and I feel so much compassion towards and for one another that having different opinions is totally okay. One thing that is true for most of us navigating this, and for most people actually, is that self-criticism is a part of most people's lives. Self-criticism comes in uninvited. It chips in, it chips away. It keeps asking, have you done enough? Are you good enough? Have you worked hard enough? Maybe you didn't do your research. Self-criticism comes in all the time. Self-compassion, on the other hand, needs to be invited. And like Ria says, we need to take a pause and a moment to really invite self-compassion in. Self-compassion is going to ask us, what do you need? And so we have a choice to either be a little bit unaware and let self-criticism chip away and tap away, or if we start to invite self-compassion in, maybe once a week, maybe once a day, and every now and then we can be curious and ask, what is it you actually truly need? That to me was such an amazing and a really, really good reminder that I really hope it also helps you get back into that driver's seat, put cancer onto the back seat. I'm so grateful we chatted to Ria. If I'm asking my true self-compassion, what do I need now? Then I can tell you and share with you that my tummy is rumbling and that I'm going to spend 3 minutes in preparing myself a really delicious, balanced snack plate, something I do almost every week. And yeah, after that, I shall be ready to carry on with my day. But for now, I know I need a little pause and a moment to be still. And I hope that is also a reminder for you to take that moment in your busy days and your busy lives as well. See you next week.